Hey there, flute friends, Dr. Eiben here. Today we're going to be talking about the second TMEA All-State Flute Etude, which is C-sharp minor. And this is a help video that's hopefully going to give you some tricks and some practice tips whenever you're preparing for your upcoming audition. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we are going to first start with some fundamental exercises before we dive into the etude. The very first one is the flexibility exercise. It's so important to warm up with some sort of flexibility exercise because you are practicing this very important fundamental of changing the direction of your air smoothly. You have to do this all the time when you play the flute, and so it's just important to isolate that one fundamental and practice it in an exercise. In addition to this exercise, I would highly encourage you to practice something with harmonics. There's lots of different books and things like that that you can practice out of. Okay, so here's our first flexibility exercise. There at the top, I have some tempo markings for you. The first minimum tempo is quarter note equals 60, and that's where I'm going to start. And so the idea here is that you start with 60, and as you get really good at it, you just mark through those tempos and slowly work through them, and that way you can see your progress. All right, the next portion is going to deal with articulation and technique. So the idea here is that I put together these three different articulations that are commonly found throughout this etude. And we're just going to practice them. We're going to apply them to the next few technical exercises. So the great thing about this is you have some room here. You can do this however you want. You can have an A day where you perform all of these with the articulation A, and the next day you can go to articulation B, or you can alternate and say, okay, I'm going to play line A with articulation A, line B with articulation B, and change it up. It's however you want to do it, but just be sure that you are incorporating these three articulations in some form or fashion. Okay, so this next portion also is going to deal with the minor scale. Just real briefly, a minor scale relates to a major scale in that they have the same key signature, but the minor scale starts on the 6th scale degree. So our key of C sharp minor is the sister key to E major in that they both have the same key signature of 4 sharps. So if you think about your E major scale and you go to the 6th note, C sharp is the 6th note, and so you will start and end on C sharp, but still using the same key signature as E major. So hopefully that just gives you a brief explanation. And what I just described is the natural minor form. You're just going to play everything as written. The second form of minor, you just simply take the 7th note and you raise it by a half step. And then in the melodic minor scale, you take the 6th and 7th note, raise those by a half step, but only on the way up. On the way down, you play the natural minor form. That is a really quick and very brief explanation of minor scales, but if you want to dive more into that, I have written all of that down here, and you can explore that a little bit more on your own. Okay, so now we're going to play through these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play articulation A with natural minor, articulation B with harmonic minor, and articulation C with melodic minor. right, so let's talk about the melodic minor scale very briefly. I have a couple of fingering suggestions here. So, there are three different fingerings for B flat or A sharp, which is inharmonically the same note. So you have to always make a decision on which fingering is going to be the best to use. In my opinion, for this scale, since going up you don't have to deal with any of those pesky B naturals being right next to a B flat, you can simply have your thumb on the what I like to call the flat side. So this is the natural side where you would play B natural, and this is the flat side where you would play B flat, or in this case, A sharp. So we're going to use thumb B flat on the way up, and then our thumb comes up for this C sharp right here, and then when it goes back down, you could just simply play B natural. So on the way down, the thumb is going to be on the natural side. So I think that's the best way to do it for this exercise. Our next technique exercise is going to be the arpeggios. Now, this one can be challenging because of the first two notes of each group. You're going to have to do a pinky slide. So, meaning you're going to have to keep that pinky really curved, and get it up to the camera here, really curved and really relaxed, and just making sure that your pinky is moving smoothly without any blips. And so that's going to be part of the reason I wanted you to do this exercise. And it continues to explore that key of C sharp minor. Do the same thing with this arpeggio. Go ahead and make a choice on which articulation to use. So it might be that you just alternate days, and that's totally fine. So I'm going to choose articulation A, and I'm going to play these arpeggios. And again, you can also still use this practice tempo chart as a guide for how fast or slow you want to practice this. All right, the next part of this video is going to deal with vibrato. As you can see here, I have a lot of thoughts on vibrato, and so I'm not going to go through every single bit of this. I'll go over it briefly, and in the link below, you'll see access to this PDF, and go ahead and read through this on your own. I'll also leave my email at the end of this video, so if you have any questions about this, please feel free to email me. But just very briefly, in general, yes, it's very important to practice vibrato. And again, we're taking a fundamental and separating it from everything else. And so what we're doing in this exercise is just simply pulsing the written rhythm. Okay, so what you're trying to focus on is just keeping all of these waves extremely round and very even. If it starts to get to where you get this kind of throat sound as you're playing, which happens sometimes, that just simply means that your throat is too tight. And so you want to be sure that you're keeping everything very relaxed. A good way to practice that is just to simply try to blow hot air on your hand, and then just feel the openness of the throat. And that's exactly how you want your throat to feel as you're playing and doing these vibrato exercises. Okay, so I recommend to play these starting at quarter note equals 60 and moving up all the way to quarter note equals 110. So we'll start this exercise first at quarter note equals 60. If you notice here, the first time I wrote to do it at forte, and second time it's piano. Then the third time you're going to take everything up an octave and play it forte. The fourth time up an octave and play it piano. So what we're doing is we're practicing the vibrato with different levels of dynamics and in different ranges. Okay, and before we play the third line, just notice that I'm still trying to make the waves very, very wide, keeping everything relaxed, and it's just it's a spinning forward moving motion with the air is what you're trying to achieve. once you get it to that tempo, practicing it at quarter note equals 110 with a triplet speed, that's about as fast as you're ever going to want your vibrato to be. And at that point, that's the speed in which your vibrato is ready to use and ready to be applied to music. Our last fundamental exercise is going to be our pinky exercise. So after practicing this exercise, you're probably going to love me or hate me. Hopefully you'll benefit from it. I know you will. But they just can be quite challenging the first time you try them. So just don't get frustrated. Try to keep that hand relaxed. And if you do find yourself getting frustrated or getting little cramps in your hand or anything like that, just put the flute down for a second, for 5 minutes, maybe go stretch, get a cup of coffee, and then come back and try them again. So what I recommend doing here is just taking your pinky and just doing a single swipe on your nose, and that just gets some natural oil from your skin, acts as a lubricant, and then it helps you kind of slide around these keys a little bit easier. Okay, so if you want to do any more of these kinds of exercises, I sort of got inspiration from the Trevor Y Practice Technique book, and he has a whole page full of these. And so what I did was I rewrote them sort of based on that and based on the notes that you're going to see in the etude. So you are going to have some pinky action going on in your etude, so it's just good to be prepared before you start diving into that technique. Okay, so I would recommend starting out slowly, about quarter note equals 40. Go ahead and have that eighth note subdivision on, and notice each line has a repeat. So just continue to be patient with yourself, and you're working towards evenness. And again, keeping that finger very curved and very relaxed the whole time that you're doing this. If you're making your pinky flat and kind of pushing hard, you're going to start finding that you're going to get cramps very quickly. So being relaxed is the name of the game. Okay, let's try this. Okay, remember to stay relaxed. As we bump up that tempo, we tend to get a little more tense, so continue to stay relaxed. All right, and we are finally going to dive into the etude. So these first 4 measures actually do have some rhythm issues, and it's very easy to play the wrong rhythm. And so we're going to break down bit by bit how we can practice the rhythm and subdivision so that we can continue to have good, consistent rhythm throughout the etude. So measures 1 through 4 is a common theme that you're going to see a few times, and so I chose this as just a way to demonstrate a way that you can practice rhythm and subdivision and keep everything very even and consistent. Okay, so right here at the top, these are the first 4 measures just as written. Okay, so let's go ahead and play those. All of my tempos for this first section is going to be quarter note equals 60. And when you play this, I recommend not using subdivision because you're going to have to practice changing the subdivision on your own. Take a quick look at line A. So this is going to represent the subdivision that you're going to have to practice changing between as you're playing this line. So it jumps from 2 to 4 to 2 to 3, and it just continues to change. So what I've done is I've taken the subdivision that you're going to have to think, and I just simply put it on one note. So all you're doing in line A is focusing on the subdivision and the rhythm. The reason that's so important to practice is because you are getting to where you're making yourself play consistently. So you don't want to get to where you're playing your triplet too fast as compared to how you're playing your duples. And so this is just keeping you right on track with consistency with your subdivision. Okay, so line B, what we're going to do is we're going to take that same subdivision, but we've added all of the notes that are happening in the etude. We haven't added grace notes or articulations or slurs or anything like that yet. Still the same rhythm, we've just added notes. So we're taking this step by step. Okay, so here is line B, quarter note equals 60. Once you get really good at that, you're ready to move on to line C. So let's just take a look at the comparison between line B and line C, and hopefully this can help you figure out why I wrote line B the way I did. It's very important, especially I think for the 16th note passages. So right here, notice I had you play 2/16 on this F sharp, and then right here you have an 8th note. So what I'm wanting you to do is still think this in your head to help you place these 16th notes correctly. Same thing here on this dotted rhythm. I had you play 3/16 notes in place of that dotted 8th note so that you could place this D sharp in the correct place. So I still want you to think this subdivision in your head as you play this. So you practiced on line B, dee 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 da dum, but you actually have to play dee da dum. And if you think those 3/16 notes in this dotted 8th note, you're going to be able to play this perfectly every time. And if it's one thing I know, I've been to many, many auditions where students simply don't subdivide in their head as they're playing, and then it's just very easy to mess up the rhythm, especially on the slow etudes. That's why this is just so important. Let's play line C together. This is quarter note equals 60. And the last step, once you get really good at line C, is to add in those grace notes. And so it's so important to be able to practice this really well and to nail down those rhythms before you add in the grace notes. Because if you add in the grace notes too early, sometimes we can let that alter the rhythm. So get this really, really good to where you know exactly where all those notes go, and then you can fit in the little grace notes among the written rhythm. Okay, so here is measures 1 through 4 as written one more time at quarter note equals 60. All right, let's talk about measures 14 through 16, which in my opinion is one of the trickier parts of the etude. So if you look at the actual etude, this is what it looks like, 14 to 16. That looks crazy. It's like, what is going on? So let's break that down step by step. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is gonna be exactly how we started working on measures 1 through 4. We're going to start simply with the rhythm and the subdivision, and that's it on a single note. So we're just gonna simplify everything. This next line has the exact same rhythm, but now we're adding the actual notes that are in the etude. So the first time you do it, don't add any of the slurs or ties yet. That's why I wrote in the slurs with sort of a dotted line, and so that the first time that you play them, and these are actually all ties, so no slurs, all ties. So all these ties are written with a dotted line so that the first time that you play them through, do without ties completely and then add the ties in. What this does is it allows you to really figure out exactly how long those ties are going to be, and so that you don't place the notes incorrectly following the tie. Okay, let's talk about a couple of notes in this measure right here, and this is measure 15 before we play it. So we have this funny looking X here in front of the note. All that is a double sharp. So a regular sharp that looks like a hashtag or a number sign is going to simply raise the note by a half step or one note up in your chromatic scale. A double sharp raises the note 2 half steps, or in other words, a whole step. So a whole step up from F is going to be G. So F double sharp is fingered like G natural, and you have 2 of those in this measure. And that's it. That's actually pretty simple. And then this little figure right here looks a little bit crazy. We have an A sharp and a B sharp. This is simply a chromatic figure. So if you know your chromatic scale really well, this actually is no big deal. So this A sharp, you're going to use your lever fingering because that's going to be our chromatic fingering, and B sharp is fingered just like C natural. Okay, so let's play this line together. I'm still at that same tempo of quarter note equals 55. I'm going to do it twice. The first time I'm going to do without ties, and the second time I'm going to add the ties. Once you get really comfortable with the rhythm in measures 14 to 16, then it's time to start adding the turns and the mordent and all the rest of the ornamentation. So let's jump to measure 16 and talk about this turn. So if you look back at the etude, you see it's written just like this. It's this funny looking sideways kind of backwards S, and then it has a sharp beneath it. So this is called a turn, and what it's telling you is you're going to start on the note that's actually written, which is a C sharp, and then you notice the shape goes up. So that means you're going to go up to the next note, which is always the next note in the key signature, in this case being D sharp. So our first two notes are C sharp, D sharp, then you go back to the written note, which is C sharp, and then this shape actually goes down. So that means you're going to go below the written note. And since the sharp is on the bottom of the turn, that's telling you that the lower note of the turn is going to be raised a half step. So instead of playing a B, you're going to play a B sharp. Now, if this sharp was above the turn, which you will see in other music, that means that the note that goes up is going to be the note that has the accidental on it. You'll even see turns with flats and things like that. So that's all that means. And you actually do that in a written rhythm. And this is that rhythm right here. So just like I do anything else, we're going to practice the basic subdivision first on a single note without the turn, and then we'll add in the notes. So let's just start with this very basic rhythm right here. 1 ta te ta 2. Okay, and I'm still at quarter note equals 55. We'll play this a couple of times. Once you get really good at that, you notice that this triplet, and this looks really crazy, but just think about it this way. This triplet is going to occupy the same amount of time as this second 16th note, and that's why I had you play it just plain like that the first time. So D, 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 D. It does go kind of fast, and so I'm going to bump the tempo down just a little bit. Let's bump it down to quarter note equals 50. And all this is, all these arrows are showing you the down and the upbeat. So actually, let's play this one more time, and I'm going to have my 8th note subdivision on so that my metronome will show me the downbeats and the upbeats, and it's going to be easier for you to line up those notes. That's a little bit of an articulation exercise too, so you're also working on fast tonguing, which is good. Okay, so now once you get really good at that, all of this is going to be slurred, and you're going to practice putting in those notes of the turn. So on this second note, because it moves so fast, and C sharp to D sharp actually has quite a bit of finger movement, an easier way to do that is just to simply put down the second trill key, which is the trill key that's closest to the pinky, and you're going to put that down, and it sounds a D sharp. Now, it's not going to sound it in tune, and it's not the best sound. This is an alternate fingering, so you never want to use this fingering on a note that's sustained, but it's good for technique, and since it goes so fast, you don't really notice it so much, so it's good for technique purposes. Okay, and then just a reminder that B sharp, just like we had before, is fingered just like C natural. So let's play this measure right here a couple of times. And then once you get really good at that, then you're ready to play measure 16 as it's written. Okay, before we put all these measures together, now let's talk about that mordant that's in measure 15. So let's take a look at the etude. This is measure 15 right here, and you have this little squiggly line right here. It kind of looks like a trill marking, but it's actually a mordant. So if you've watched my other help video on our first etude, F major, I go in detail about mordants. So just a quick explanation. It's just like a trill. It's a quick alternation between the note that's written and the note above it, and the note above is always coming from the key signature. And it's just going to be one quick wiggle, and that's it. So that's basically the difference between a mordant and a trill, is that it's just quick. Okay, and you're also going to take those three notes and still give it some rhythmic value, so you're going to practice it just like a triplet. Measure 15, I'm going to break it down just like I broke down measure 16. So at first, we're going to start with just that basic rhythm. We'll put in the triplet, just tonguing it on a single note. Then we'll put in the actual notes, and then we'll put it in as it's written in the etude. Okay, so let's play the first measure. Again, I've slowed this down a little bit, so it's at quarter note equals 50, and I have my eighth note subdivision on. Okay, here's the second measure, and again, with this little triplet, turn off my metronome here. With this little triplet, it's occupying the same amount of time as a 16th note. All right, and then in the third measure, I'm going to play that same rhythm. I'm now slurring because that's how it's written in the etude. And I'm adding this A because, again, the mordant is indicating that I'm going to go up to the next note in the key signature. The fingering I would recommend for this is just to simply keep this G sharp pinky down and only move the third finger. It just keeps you from having to move two fingers, and it helps you gain some cleanliness there. And so it's just a quick alternate fingering that should be a little bit easier for you. Okay, so we're going to play this third measure a couple of times, same tempo, quarter note equals 50. Okay, and then we're going to put it all together as written. So I'm now on this fourth measure. We've broken down in detail measures 15 and measure 16, and we've practiced the subdivision for all three measures without ties. So once you do all those steps, and it shouldn't take you very long, then you should be ready to play these measures. This seems like a lot of steps, but honestly, it really is worth it so that you're not only getting to where you can play this correctly, but you're understanding what you're looking at and you're understanding how this rhythm works. So now this is measures 14 to 16 as written, and I'm at quarter note equals 50. The last section we're going to talk about with the C sharp minor etude is going to be measures 26 to 33. And the reason I chose these measures is because I feel like this is the most technically demanding part of the etude. So this is also the part where the tempo does speed up slightly. And I would recommend, since the actual etude goes between 56 and 62, maybe not going any faster than about 70, because you don't want it to sound hurried or rushed, but at the same time, it does need to be slightly faster than the original tempo. So today I'm going to practice with you just at quarter note equals 65, but if you wanted to perform it ever so slightly faster than that at your audition, I think that would be okay, but probably not any faster than 70. Okay, so let me talk to you a little bit how I practice technique with my students. First of all, we go over all of these places that have what I like to call a potential blip. And that means when you're going in between 2 or 3 or even 4 notes that are a little bit tricky fingering wise, usually has to deal with when you're having to flip-flop fingers or when you're having to add pinkies. So the first one that I talked about with my kiddos was G sharp to D sharp. And that's simply because your fingers are having to alternate over the flute, and you have to worry about this pinky sometimes being a little bit lazy and not moving in time. So what I tell my students is I say, okay, we're going to practice a tricky fingering exercise on these two notes, and we just play those two notes over and over. We do it very slowly at first. And then we'll go slightly faster. And so that's all we're doing, is we're just working on the technique and isolating the problems between those notes. So I would suggest all these places that I marked, just isolating those places and practicing those two, and even right here is a group of 4 notes, and just practice them slowly and get to where you can move your fingers evenly and there's no blips at all. Okay, and then I also have some suggestions on different fingerings for your A sharp. There are a couple of places you want to use 1 and 1 and lever, and I don't have any thumb places here. So the way I make my decisions on which fingering to use is based on this finger right here. So if I have to use this finger, which is the first finger on my right hand, for the note right before or right after the A sharp, if I have to use that, so say in this first measure 26, I'm going from an E to an A sharp, I have to use 1 and 1. I cannot use lever because I'm having to slide back and forth between those fingers, or between those keys, and that's not going to be a good thing, because you're going to probably have blips or just some uncleanliness in the technique. So be really smart about how you're choosing your fingerings. You don't necessarily have to use these fingerings, but these are the ones that I would use if I was doing this audition. Okay, so the first step in working on this technique, of course, is to slow it down. So let's go to about quarter note equals 55, and we're going to practice 1 beat at a time. And I like to overlap these beats. So what we're going to do is we'll just practice the first line, and I'd like to go 1 ta 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 2, 2 ta 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 3, 3 ta 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 1, like that. Okay, so here's the first measure. This is measure 26. So you can practice the entire thing just like that. And then once you get really good at that, maybe do an entire measure at a time. And you'll just practice it like that throughout the entire section. Okay, and then once you get really good at that, continue to keep your metronome at a slower tempo, and then just try to play it through. Don't push yourself to play too fast too soon to where you get sloppiness going on in your technique. Okay, so this is the whole section 25 to 33, and then I will bump it up and I'll play it one more time at a faster tempo. So this is quarter note equals 55. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video to be helpful. And if you have any questions at all, my email is right there. Be sure to email me. Again, my name is Dr. Eiben, and have fun practicing and preparing. We'll talk to you soon.